Hello, dear children. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Jisha Joe. In this session, we are starting with a new chapter of Class 11 NCERT Biology, Cell Cycle and Cell Division. If we take any living organism, we can understand that every living organism begins its life as a single cell. In the case of unicellular organisms like bacteria, amoeba, yeast, etc., you can see that this single cell grows in size and it divides into two. So, in unicellular organisms, this cell division is a form of reproduction which we call as asexual reproduction. Whereas in the case of multicellular organisms, we know we began our life as a single cell, which is the zygote, which is formed by the fusion of the egg and the sperm cell. So this single-celled zygote has undergone repeated division to form mass of cells, and this mass of cells have undergone differentiation to produce or form the various organs and organ systems of our body, and this in turn has resulted in the development of a multicellular organism. So cell growth and reproduction or cell division are important characteristics of every living organism. So once a cell is formed newly, it is not capable of reproducing immediately as soon as its formation. A newly formed cell cannot undergo reproduction. It has to undergo a period of growth, during which it enlarges in size, it duplicates its DNA content, and the cell grows in size, the nucleus enlarges, the cellular contents increase, and all these take place before the cell is capable of division. So we know that cell growth and cell division or reproduction is both of these said, that is cell division and reproduction, are important characteristics of any living organism. Okay, so a newly formed cell has to undergo a period of growth during which it becomes fully capable of producing daughter cells. So what is cell cycle? Cell cycle refers to the sequence of events that occur in a cell that causes it to divide and produce two new daughter cells. Okay, cell cycle is the series or sequences of events that take place in a cell that causes it to divide to produce daughter cells. So what are these series or sequences of events that are taking place in the cell? We know a newly formed cell has to grow in size, increase in size. Then what should happen? The DNA content, the genetic material has to duplicate, because during or after cell division, the DNA content has to be equally distributed to the daughter cells. So the duplication or the replication of DNA has to take place, and finally this division of the cell has to occur. So these are the sequences or series of events that take place in a cell, which enables the cell to produce copies of itself or produce daughter cells. So what is cell cycle? Cell cycle refers to the sequences of events that occur in a cell that causes it to divide and produce daughter cells. So what are these sequences of events? That is the growth of the cell, that is increase in the cytoplasm, increase of the cell contents, followed by the replication of the DNA, the duplication of the genetic material, which in turn is followed by cell division. So these entire sequence of events is called as the cell cycle. So as I told you, a newly formed cell, once a cell is newly formed, it is not capable of reproducing. It has to undergo a period of growth. And during this period of growth, the cell attains its maximum size, the DNA content or the genetic material duplicates, so that during cell division, the DNA or the cellular contents get equally distributed between the daughter cells produced. This period of growth in the cell cycle is called as the interphase. So I hope you have understood what is cell cycle. Now we are moving on to one of the stages or phases of the phases of a cell cycle, that is the interphase. So interphase is the period of growth. In simple terms, it is the period of growth during which the cell prepares itself for the next cell division. Okay, so I'll just draw a diagram. That is a newly formed cell. Okay, that is a newly formed cell. This newly formed cell has to undergo a period of growth. Okay, so that is the fully formed cell, which is again capable of producing two new daughter cells. So these are the two new daughter cells produced. Okay, so that is, these two are the newly formed cells. I'm just taking one of the daughter cell, the cell getting enlarged and assuming or becoming it in its full grown phase, and in turn it is undergoing the process of division. So this period of growth is called as the interphase. Interphase is, in simple words, it is the period of growth. So what is actually taking place here in the interphase? Interphase is one of the phases of the cell cycle. Okay, so that I told you, interphase is the period of growth. The second phase of cell cycle is the M phase. M phase refers to the phase of cell division, during which the fully formed or the fully grown cell divides to produce two new daughter cells. Okay, so today we are focusing more on the first phase of the cell cycle, that is interphase. Okay, so you already know that interphase is the period during which the cell grows in size, prepares itself for the next cell division. This interphase is divided into three stages. The three stages of interphase are G1 phase, the S phase, and the G2 phase. These are the three phases of interphase. Okay, so G1 phase is the phase immediately after the formation of a new cell. That is, how is the new cell formed? After the M phase or the mitotic phase. So G1 phase occurs immediately after the formation of a new cell. So that is the G1 phase, which follows the M phase. So it is called as the post-mitotic gap, or it is otherwise called as the first gap phase, or G1 phase, or it is the post-mitotic gap because it occurs immediately after mitosis. Okay, so G1 phase is also called as post-mitotic gap. Okay, so that is the first phase, the G1 phase. What actually happens during the G1 phase? We know, I already told you, during the interphase, growth of the cell takes place. So during G1 phase, the actual growth of the cell takes place. Cell increases in size, the cell contents, the cytoplasm increases. RNA and proteins are formed. More amount of RNA and proteins are formed. So all these occur during the G1 phase. The second phase of the interphase is the S phase. S phase is otherwise called as the synthesis phase. Okay, S refers to the synthesis phase. Synthesis phase. What is actually being synthesized during this phase? It is the DNA. DNA duplication or the replication of the DNA takes place during the synthesis phase. Okay, so remember, it is during the synthesis phase or the S phase of interphase DNA duplication takes place. Okay, if suppose a cell has the nucleus of a cell has chromosome number 2 chromosomes are present. So that is the nuclear membrane, that is the nucleus I am drawing there. So that is one chromosome, and this is the second chromosome. 2 chromosomes are there. That is a cell with 2 chromosomes, having 2 chromosomes. Okay, so what happens during the synthesis phase is that the DNA of the chromosomes increase or duplicate. So the DNA duplicates. Okay, so after DNA duplication, each chromosome will have 2 arms which are called as the chromatids joined at the centromere. So just look at the cell. In the beginning also there were just 2 chromosomes. After DNA duplication or the replication of DNA also, we can see only 2 chromosomes. But the DNA content has increased. So remember, during the S phase, duplication of the DNA takes place, or replication of the DNA takes place. DNA content doubles, but the chromosome number remains the same. Okay, so during synthesis phase, it is the DNA that gets duplicated, chromosome number remains the same. In the beginning also there were only 2 chromosomes. After the S phase also you can just see only 2 chromosomes here. But what has happened? The DNA content has duplicated. So remember, it is during the synthesis phase of interphase DNA duplication takes place. Okay, so that is the S phase. S phase refers to the synthesis phase. What is being synthesized during the S phase? The DNA content gets duplicated. Another important thing that is taking place in the S phase is the duplication of the centrioles. In certain cells, the centrioles, which are organelles that are present only in animal cells, they are seen very close to the nucleus. In the case of animal cells, and these are the organelles that are involved in the formation of spindle fibers. Okay, so this duplication of the centrioles also take place during the S phase. So most important thing is the duplication of the DNA, and in some of the cells, centrioles also get duplicated during the S phase or the synthesis phase. Now moving on to the third phase of interphase, which is the G2 phase or the second gap phase. When does it take place? It takes place just before the mitotic phase, isn't it? Just before cell division, the G2 phase occurs. So it is also called as the pre-mitotic phase or the pre-mitotic gap. Okay, pre-mitotic gap phase. Okay, because it is the gap phase which occurs just before the M phase. That is why it is called as the pre-mitotic gap phase. So what happens during the G2 phase? Again, the cell increases in size, the nucleus enlarges. Okay, and the cell content, cytoplasm increases, more amount of RNA and proteins are synthesized. Now the next stage is the cell division stage or the M phase. So the cell has to completely prepare itself before it enters into the cell division phase. So more amount of RNA and proteins are synthesized, more amount of cytoplasm is produced, the nucleus becomes bigger in size, because already chromosomes have, the DNA duplication have taken place there. So all these occur during the G2 phase. Okay, so that is the G2 phase. So now what have you understood? We have seen that interphase is the period of growth during which the cell prepares itself for the next cell division. Interphase is divided into 3 phases: the G1 phase, the S phase, and the G2 phase. G1 phase is it follows the M phase. That is why it is called as the post-mitotic gap phase, during which the cell increases in size, more amount of RNA, proteins, etc. synthesized. The S phase is the specific stage in the cell cycle during which the duplication of the DNA takes place, or the replication of the DNA takes place during the S phase. Please remember that it is during the S phase that synthesis of DNA or the replication of DNA takes place. Okay, and in certain cells you can also see that the centrioles duplicating during the S phase. Then coming to the G2 phase, G2 phase it occurs just before the mitotic phase. So that is why it is called as the pre-mitotic gap phase. And so we have seen these are the 3 phases of interphase. And among the 3 phases, we can see that the G1 phase is the longest phase of interphase, and G2 phase is the shortest phase of interphase. Okay, G1 phase is the longest phase and G2 phase is the shortest phase. The phase during which duplication of DNA takes place, it is during the synthesis phase or the S phase. Now, the cell cycle in different cells vary. In the case of human cells, we can see that the cell cycle occurs, it is for every 24 hours the cell divides. Okay, the cell cycle occurs every 24 hours in the case of human cells, whereas in the case of yeast cells, we can see that cell cycle occurs at every 90 minutes. So the cell cycle of different cell varies. Now, so that is with regard to interphase. And one more thing. So in certain cells, like as in the case of nerve cells once formed, they are not capable of dividing. So such cells that do not divide, what happens to such cells? Once those such type of cells are formed, they have to undergo the G1 phase. They have to undergo some amount of growth. Okay, but they are not undergoing the M phase, or the cell division phase is not occurring in such cells. So in cells which do not divide further, what happens in such cases? You can see that a newly formed cell will enter into the G1 phase, but at the end of G1 phase the cell decides. We know in the case of cells that do not divide further, such type of cells need not duplicate the DNA. Why is the replication or the duplication of DNA taking place? That is, after the cell division, the DNA has to be equally distributed to the 2 daughter cells. So if no cell division is taking place, there is no need for the duplication of DNA. So the cell need not enter into the synthesis phase. So in such cases, in cells which do not undergo division or which do not divide further, at the end of the G1 phase, the cell enters into a phase which is called as the G0 phase or the quiescent stage. That is the quiescent stage. So in what type of cells does the G0 phase occur? In cells which do not divide further. An example of such a cell is the nerve cell. So, only if the cell has to divide, it needs to enter into the S phase. I hope you have understood that, because in the S phase, the duplication of the DNA is taking place. And why is the duplication of DNA taking place there? Because during cell division, the chromosomes or the DNA has to be equally distributed to the newly formed daughter cells. So if it is not dividing further, there is no need for the replication or the duplication of the DNA. So it need not enter into the S phase, but at the end of the G1 phase, it will enter into another phase which is called as the G0 phase or the quiescent stage. So that is with regard to interphase. I hope you have understood the different stages of interphase. Now moving on to the second phase of the cell cycle, that is the M phase. M stands for mitotic. Mitotic phase. It is the phase during cell division take place. Okay, we have seen the cell cycle includes the period of growth followed by cell division. There is a period of growth, duplication of DNA is taking place, and then finally the cell is undergoing division. This entire cycle is called as the cell cycle. So interphase is the first phase of cell cycle, and the second phase of cell cycle is the M phase or the mitotic phase. Now what actually happens during the mitotic phase or the M phase? M phase is divided into two stages. Okay, the first stage is karyokinesis. And the second stage is cytokinesis. So these are the two stages of M phase. Okay, M phase, what happens during M phase? The division of the cell takes place. The first phase of my M phase is the karyokinesis. Karyon means nucleus, kinesis means splitting or the division. So what happens during karyokinesis? The division of the nucleus takes place, or the nuclear division takes place during karyokinesis. And the second phase or the second stage of M phase is the cytokinesis, where the division of the cytoplasm takes place. So it is the M phase during which the division of the cell takes place, and the M phase is divided into two stages. First stage is the karyokinesis, during which nuclear division takes place, and the second stage is the cytokinesis, during which the division of the cytoplasm takes place. Okay, so that is with regard to the M phase. So once again, the cell cycle is divided into two phases. The growth phase is called as the interphase, and the cell division phase is called as the M phase. If you look at the cell cycle, you can see that major portion of the cell cycle is occupied by the interphase. So the longest phase of cell cycle is the interphase. Remember, the longest phase of interphase is the G1 phase. The shortest phase of interphase is the G2 phase. Okay, what happens during the S phase? Duplication of DNA or replication of DNA is a unique feature of S phase, synthesis phase. Karyokinesis is the division of the nucleus, and cytokinesis refers to the division of cytoplasm. And we have also discussed about the G0 phase, which is otherwise called as the quiescent stage, which occurs in cells which do not undergo further division. And one more thing, the interphase, we cannot see the changes taking place in the chromosomes. That is, during the interphase, the changes that are taking place in the chromosomes are not visible externally. Okay, if we look at the cells in the M phase, we can see the changes taking place in the chromosome very clearly, whereas in the case of interphase, the changes taking place in the chromosomes are not visible externally. Okay, so interphase is referred to as the resting phase. But we know actually it is not the resting phase. It is a phase during which the cell prepares itself, gets ready for the next cell division. Okay, so why is interphase called as the resting phase? Because the changes taking place in the chromosomes during the interphase is not visible externally. So my dear children, I hope this session is clear to you. If you have any doubts regarding what we have studied today, please ask your doubts and please give your suggestions in the comment section. Thank you.